Shoryu, can I do a bit of an introduction to those of you within the Sangha here that aren't familiar with Reverend Bradley?
Sure, by all means.
I met Shoryu back when his name was Zenshin, back about 2004. He came here from Austin, Texas, as a priest from what temple was that exactly?
Austin Zen Center. I was practicing there.
Okay, and you were amongst the first people to get transmission from Hojo-san, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And he is now the abbot of Gyobutsuji in Northwest Arkansas. And let's see, is there anything I need to add to this? I think you have a background in social work?
I have a counseling degree. I have a degree in rehab counseling, but my Zen practice kind of ruined my counseling career, so to speak. So I never really used that degree, but I have some background in counseling, yeah.
We're glad to have you here. It's nice to hear a different voice occasionally, so I'll not hold you up any further.
Okay. Well, thank you very much and good morning. It's really nice to be here virtually. This is the first Zoom talk I've ever done. So here we go. We are in unusual times now. So I guess we're changing and doing new things in our practice. And I just appreciate this opportunity because it's been a long time since I've been able to connect with folks and give a talk like this. So today I would like to talk about racial issues and how that might relate to our practice. This is a huge topic, of course, and it's very much up in our culture right now. So I'm just going to be, scratching the surface as far as what could be said about these issues. Of course, right now we have protests that are going on. They've been going on for a couple of months now almost. And this is something that's really in the forefront in our culture right now, of course. But this talk will, just as I say, scratch the surface a little bit. And what I hope to do is just add a little bit to the conversation, really, because I think more than ever we're realizing that we need to talk about these kinds of issues in our society in general. And I think in our sanghas, we need to start addressing and facing these kinds of issues in our religious communities, in Zen communities, of course, specifically. But I don't think with this group of folks I need to really make the case that there's systemic racism in our country and probably most cultures in the world. The wealth gap between white folks and minority folks is huge. It increased, it nearly tripled from 1984 to 2009. Hispanics and Blacks experience disproportionately high rates of poverty in comparison to whites and Asians. There's large disparities in educational opportunities, home ownership, the criminal justice system. There's overwhelming evidence that the criminal justice system is racially biased, of course. education, suburban, predominantly white schools typically spend twice as much on their students than inner city or predominantly minority schools. So I could go on and on. Healthcare disparities, access to healthcare, shorter lifespans. So we all know that we have a serious problem in our society. So first of all, maybe I'll just see are there any traditional views on racial issues in Buddhism? And I kind of researched this a little bit, and actually, no, there's not in the way that we would think of it in the ancient text, and that's mainly because race was something created by European people in the 15th or 16th century in order to justify enslaving people. So of course, there's no biological basis for race. Science now clearly shows this, that race is a social construct. So it hasn't really been around that long. People didn't think in terms of different races until pretty recently in human history. And that was solely for economic purposes, to morally justify the economic benefits of enslaving other people. So, but anyway, actually, in the Buddha's time, there was, of course, a very strict caste system, a social classification of different people according to these castes. And it was thought that, well, I don't have to go into the details of that, but especially during the Buddha's day, there was a debate about the highest religious class, which was, the Brahmins. And, Brahmins were thought to be, at the time of the Buddha, like something, I guess, what we would call today genetically superior, or it was all had to do with heritage. So anyway, this is kind of a theme that runs through the early Pali texts of the Buddha kind of, facing Brahmins and them, trying to say that they're inherently superior at times because of their birth. So, the people even back then the Brahmins were supposed to look better, they were supposed to behave better, and actually the people in the lowest caste were of darker complexion. So there's some comparable issues going on there, maybe for us today to learn from. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about one instance where the Buddha, I think, clearly made it obvious that he didn't buy into this idea of people being superior, by birth. So there were two Brahmins arguing with each other as to whether, a Brahmin was Brahmin because of his heritage or because of his spiritual nature. And basically, probably I shouldn't just read this to you, but basically the Buddha said, you can see clearly in different creatures like ants, moths, deer, you can see there's different species. He didn't use that word, but he said you can see that there's different kind of varieties of these different creatures. But for human beings, there's no such way to distinguish between people according to the way they look or the way that they're born or their, what we would call today, their genetic heritage. He says, basically, I do not call someone a Brahmin based on genealogy and material origin. He is just a pompous speaker if he is impeded by such things. And he goes on to, define a Brahmin as a spiritual kind of state that his point was what really matters is who a person is spiritually or in their heart. So looking around a little bit to what Dogen Zenji said, of course, there was a huge social hierarchy in his day too. And Dogen Zenji was from the highest class, I think almost the highest to below the emperor. I think he was a very, well-born person, and he doesn't talk about this directly, of course, but there are certain things in his writings that, to me, lead us to believe that he didn't regard social class at all in his community. In Shobogenzo Zuimonki, he says basically, Zazen is suitable for all people. And he says also, students today should think of doing good for others without distinguishing between people of the upper or lower class, or the intimate or unrelated, even if their deeds are not seen or known to others. So even if what you do isn't seen or known to others, you shouldn't distinguish between doing something good for somebody according to the class they're in. And then briefly in Bendo Wa, there's some questions there dealing with this. I think he says in question 13, he's asked, can Zazen practice be carried out also by male and female people, lay people, or can it be practiced only by monks? And his reply was, the ancestral teacher stated that in attaining Buddha Dharma, there is no distinction between men and women, or noble and common. And in question 18, in his reply in Bendo Wa, he says, if people genuinely practice with right faith, they will all attain the way equally, without distinction between the dull and sharp-witted. Without question, all people are abundantly endowed with the true seeds of prajna. Only they rarely accept it and have yet not received it and used it. So I think it's, we can say that these great teachers thought that the Dharma was for everyone and there was no inherent difference in the worth of an individual according to their genealogy or their social status. And of course, in the Buddhist community, he allowed anyone into his community, and seniority was based only on the time that you entered the community. So a Brahmin could enter one day and someone from the lowest caste could enter the next day, from my understanding, and the person from the lower class would be senior to the Brahmin. So anyway, what I'd do right now would be to just maybe reflect on some of my own past experiences a little bit for a moment here. Let's see. Just want to make sure I'm in the right place. Okay. So I was raised in Central Texas, and I was in a small college, pretty small college town, and all of the black folks lived in one area of town, and the white folks lived in another area. But the schools were integrated, of course. By the time I was in middle school, it was the mid 1970s, and black and white folks didn't really encounter each other that much for the most part, except for in the workplace or in school. And we think, and let me say this too, this talk will probably, it'll sound like I'm really talking to white folks mainly, and because frankly, we're the ones who really need to do the work here. And I invite, of course, this is a huge conversation. Any people of color that might be listening in, I think we all need to start having these kinds of, dialogues and understanding each other better. And hopefully, we can learn from each other. And we're really, we're embedded in a racist society. This sounds like an extreme statement, but it's actually the case. The United States was founded it could not have been done without the forced labor of enslaved people. And so we're still, basically living the karma of that. And we've never reckoned with that. And we're still, there's a way that we're still working in that system. We're trying to work off of the people in power, are trying, we're all benefiting from certain elements of the population that are exploited because of this system that has been in place for, since the inception of this country. So anyway, all of us, people of color and white folks, have internalized these kinds of racist values, and we all need to practice with those, I think. So anyway, in my own case, one reflection I could have, I never started thinking about the privilege that I had as a white person until relatively recently, not really giving it some hard thought. Amazingly, when I was a kid, all of the different kids in my middle school were put into different sections. And, there was the smart section, and there was the average section, and then there was the below average section. And nobody ever said that, but we all knew, of course. I mean, I think the top section was section 20, the middle was section 30, and the lowest one was section 40. And nobody said this, but it was obvious, of course, what the sections were about. And as it turns out, almost all the Black kids were in the lowest, so-called lowest section. And, when I reflected about this over the years, I thought, well, this is based on what? I guess some kind of standardized testing. And of course, now we know that especially standardized testing in the 1970s was, even, IQ tests are extremely biased towards white culture and, almost meaningless in sort of trying to discover the achievement capability of other people outside of that ethnic group. So I recently started thinking too, it was just a way to keep us segregated too, But also what it did was those kids in the highest, section, we got college prep kind of material. And the middle kids and the kids in the middle sections got kind of like vocational training. That was the way they were going to go, I guess. And the kids in the lower sections, I don't know what was expected of them. And the horrible thing about it is that there's a really documented phenomenon called self-fulfilling prophecy, or what you expect of a person scholastically has a big influence on what they're going to produce. So if you expect very little out of somebody, they're going to produce very little. If you expect a lot, they're going to go upward and produce more. So, but these kids in the lower sections weren't even, there was no possibility for them to have any college preparation or ever apply to school. So we all internalize this too. You know, we all internalize that the people of color weren't as smart as the rest of us. And tragically, those kids, the black kids, I'm sure took that in too. You know, they internalized that too. But when I did get to college in the early 80s, I don't remember seeing any people of color hardly. I went to a state-funded school in Texas, and I don't remember really seeing hardly any people of color. So that was a tremendous amount of privilege for me and for white folks. Something that I hadn't. We don't think about this as white people, but these are the kinds of things that Black folks and other people of color face all of their life. Another short story about something. So when I was a kid, I lived in a middle-class neighborhood. My folks were sort of lower middle class, or we lived in a pretty typical middle-class neighborhood. And there was one, or I think there might have been actually two Black families that moved in, and I befriended this Black boy that was my age, and we were good buddies, and we hung out. And I remember, though, like I went over to his house a few times, and when I went in there, I just felt like I was almost, in a different world. It was like African decor in the house, and there was like Jet and Ebony magazine on the coffee table. And I remember at the time just thinking, what is this? Like somehow we were meant to believe that this was like something from another planet. But anyway, something I've been thinking about recently, I'm so embarrassed about now, and I wish that I could go back and change things, but of course we know that's impossible. But somewhere, I think I was about 8 years old, probably when we were friends, and somewhere I had overheard somebody, it might have been someone in my family. And I will say this too, my dad is from Scotland and my mother is from Canada. I was born in Canada. I moved to Texas when I was 4 or so. So you would think, well, this is one of the common arguments, like there's no racism in Europe, or if you're not from this, your ancestors aren't from this country, then, you don't have responsibility, you're not going to internalize racism or whatever. But somewhere I had heard someone say that these folks, this family, looked like they were part white because they were lighter skinned, I guess. I don't know. And because they were a middle class family living with, and the ignorant little kid that I said this to my friend Bruce one time. I heard that y'all were probably part white. And he was just like, what? We aren't part white. What are you talking about? And I had no idea why he, was upset or anything even. And but these are the kinds of things that people of color deal with all the time. Being, talked to in this way, or being pulled over for driving while Black, or all of the stuff that we hear about in our culture. So anyway, I want to get to other things here. So I just want to have put in a few concepts here so we're clear about what we're talking about. what is, and I'm going to relate this to the Dharma in a minute. What is racist? If we define this in the way that a scholar has that I think is very well respected in this field, Ibram X. Kendi, he says, a racist is one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inaction, or expressing a racist idea. And here I want to bring attention to, he's saying it's an action or inaction or an expression. An anti-racist, as he defines it, is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. So he's focused on what we do and the policies that are in place in our society. To be anti-racist is to think nothing is behaviorally wrong or right, inferior or superior with any of the racial groups. Whether the anti-racist sees individuals behaving positively or negatively, the anti-racist sees individuals behaving positively or negatively, not as representatives of whole races. So they're just being people, they're not a representative of their race. To be anti-racist is to remove the tattooed stereotype from every racial body. Behavior is something humans do, not races. So I wanted to relate this to a book that I read recently or last year, and many of you might have heard of it. It's called White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Race by Robin DiAngelo. And her point is that, you know, racism has had to stay in place in our society because of the economic reasons that I mentioned earlier. But in the 1960s, you know, white people saw these horrible cases on TV of dogs being, you know, sicked on black people and them being sprayed with hoses, you know, water hoses, and these horrible things we saw during the civil rights movement. So that became the stereotype of the bad white person, the racist white person. So there was a huge movement in people's hearts and minds, and some segment of the population, not to be associated with those Southern people that were treating, you know, black folks so atrociously. So she says that, you know, we subsequently came up with the idea that a racist is a bad person. A racist is ignorant, bigoted, prejudiced, mean-spirited, old, and Southern. That's the stereotype. A non-racist is good, progressive, educated, open-minded, well-intentioned, young Northern person. So these are, you know, the stereotypes that have developed in our heart and mind. So the problem is that white folks will do whatever they can to not be associated with this idea of the old Southern racist. So instead of trying to face our inherently racist tendencies, we will focus our attention on trying not to be perceived as racist. So we get defensive. We do anything we can to not be associated with the negative stereotype of a racist, instead of facing our karma and looking in our hearts and minds and seeing the products of our karmic conditioning that the society has put into our heart. So one thing that she mentions a few of the standard things that people say to kind of, you know, there's so much to this book. This is just scratching the surface in this issue. But so one of the things that is a reaction for white people against being associated with this stereotype is to say that we're colorblind. We don't see race. You know, I see, she comes up with a few statements here that the colorblind, so-called colorblind person says, I was taught to treat everyone the same. I don't see color. I don't care if you're pink, purple, or polka dotted. Race doesn't have any meaning to me. My parents weren't racist, so that's why I'm not a racist. Everyone struggles. If you work hard, so-and-so, you'll get ahead. So-and-so just happens to be black, but that has nothing to do with what I'm telling you about him or her. Focusing on race is what divides us. If people are respectful to me, I'm respectful to them, regardless of race. Children today are so much more open. I'm not a racist, I'm from Canada. I was picked on because I was white and grew up poor, so I don't have white privilege. So I want to make sure I tie this together here the way I had planned. Somehow I don't see it, but this idea of, let me go back to the idea of being a racist. So, you know, Sawaki Roshi said, we all have thief nature and we all have Buddha nature. So in any particular moment, you know, and this is just repeating the teachings of Dogen Zenji, you know, in a simple way. In any particular moment, we can express thief nature, you know, getting what we want at all costs. Where I'm the center of the universe, I have to avoid what I don't like and have to get what I do want. Or we can express Buddha nature, in which we understand that we're an expression of a universal self. And we might be able to say, you know, that in any particular moment, we can express racist nature or non-racist nature. So just because we make a racist statement or we do even a racist act, it doesn't mean that we're defined as a racist, you know, and that's the core of our being. So it's a very important teaching. You know, in Buddhism, we think of the self as a sort of the small, you know, this thing that's talking right now, we call Shoryu. It's sort of a phenomena that is conditioned by innumerable other things. And, you know, I don't have some unchanging nature that is going to define me for the rest of my life. This basically, I think, comes from the teaching of Nagarjuna. You know, he said, there's no difference between the doer and the thing done. So when we do something, like if we're running, the classic example is the runner and the running completely interpenetrate each other and cannot exist without each other. So there is no runner in the here and now in this particular moment if I'm not running. You know, it's an idea to say, well, I'm a runner, but in the moment of here and now, which is the only real reality we have, there is no running and runner separation. And so the other point is that in the moment of running, our entire world is running. You know, the entire world is conditioning that. We know from the teachings that we don't run on our own. You know, basically in Genjo Koan, it says that the bird flies the entire sky, and the fish swims the entire sea or the entire universe. So that's why in one moment, it's very important to try to manifest Buddha nature. And it's a life and death matter, you know, whether we do or not. And in the moment of expressing thief nature or racist nature, the entire world turns into racism. But, you know, on the conventional level, the next moment, we have a moment where we can express non-racist nature. So this white fragility that the person's talking about, it's very important for us to be able to face our karma. And this is true of any interpersonal reaction, that to see where we're deluded, where we're stuck, and to be able to let go of it is extremely important. So if we have a racist thought come up, and when we recognize it, we just deny it or say that's not racist, or that's not me, or somebody made me think that, or usually what we would probably do is just say, I'm not thinking that. I mean, I'm just let it go, you know, let it sink back down into our subconscious. But, you know, our Zazen practice, we receive everything. This is how this is related to our Zazen practice, is that we receive everything. We can't let something go unless we receive it. So it's very important to me, you know, to study the self in this way, study our history, study our karmic conditioning, and study ourselves in the moment, in each moment, so that we can let go and we have an alternative between other than our regular habit patterns. So usually, as I say, we're embedded in a racist society. So we cannot escape it. You know, we can't just say we're not racist and say that we're colorblind and it's okay. Because this is just another way to say, she says all of these claims ultimately function to exempt the person from any responsibility for participation in the problem. They take race off the table and they close rather than open any further exploration. In so doing, they protect the racial status quo. So, you know, real quickly, Okamura Roshi talks about the 5 eyes a lot, and these are the eyes that we develop, or it's kind of a metaphor for our practice of how we can experience the world. But and I won't spend a lot of time on it because I'm sorry I'm taking up too much time here, I think. But you know, basically there's the fleshy eye. The first one, that's our normal way of seeing things, just I'm the center of the world, and you know, it's the karmic eye of just I'm the center of the world. The divine eye is the next one, and Hojo-san's Okamura Roshi's interpretation is good, I think. Of course, it's an effort to see things objectively, you know, an effort to see things as in the way that all other human beings see it. So we might talk about science as, you know, kind of the divine eye. We can see things from different angles that we're not able to see by ourselves. The wisdom eye is the next level. That is the eye that sees unity. So if in our practice, in the teachings, we learn that the boundaries between each other and phenomena are really break down, and we're living one shared life. And you know, there's huge amounts of teachings on this, all the Heart Sutra teachings and beyond. That's the perspective of unity we talk about in Zen. Then the Dharma eye is the next eye, and that's the eye of the Bodhisattva. You know, Dogen Zenji's great work has, you know, true Dharma eye treasury. It's talking about this eye. The Bodhisattva eye can go between, you know, the eye of the other two, the divine eye. It takes the other eyes in addition to the wisdom eye, and it can see what beings need in order to act compassionately. So if we don't see separate beings, we can't offer to them. So to me, this has makes a lot of sense in terms of like color blindness. Because if we just say it's true, you know, race is a racial construct or a social construct, I don't have to deal with it because it doesn't exist biologically or it doesn't exist ultimately. That's a big mistake because racial inequity is there on a conventional level. We see suffering. The reason the Bodhisattva doesn't stay in the wisdom eye is because suffering cannot be addressed just staying in the realm of wisdom. And in fact, the wisdom and compassion eye are expressions of each other and do not exist. You know, you can't have one without the other. They're just different ways of looking at the same thing. So, when we're talking about our own, you know, defensiveness, so maybe I'll stop by talking about one more example from my own life, and it's not something I'm proud of. It was not so long ago. I drove my car up into a predominantly black neighborhood, and was getting out of the car and looking around and realized that I had concern about the car. You know, like I was, oh man, am I safe here? And you know, that's been conditioned by so many TV shows, by so much in our culture, you know, that we don't even know is coming in. But I'm responsible for that 100%. You know, my initial reaction was to say, oh, you know, just, I'm not feeling that. I'm a good white person. But actually, when I sat there, I realized, you know, you are feeling that. And I'm ashamed of I'm ashamed. That's another thing that we can do is use like shame or intense self-criticism to shut down and say it's hopeless and do nothing. You know, I really am bad. You know, I go into despair or something. So our Zazen practice allows us to sit with our pain. You know, we're going to have pain in addressing these issues, and we need to ask people of color to call us out and tell us when we're making mistakes. Because we can't learn, you know, we have tried throughout the ages to condition people of color not to do that. Used to be you could get in the South in Alabama or something in the early 20th century, you could get lynched for looking at someone the wrong way, or, you know, looking at a white woman, or not getting off the sidewalk at the right time to let someone else pass. So we've been trying to condition people of color for generations to not threaten us in this way. But we have to change that with our practice. And so we're going to feel some pain. If somebody says to you, man, you know, that was a racist statement, what are you going to do? You're going to feel bad. You're going to say, maybe, no, it wasn't. You don't understand what I was saying. There's not a racist bone in my body. But, you know, we need to believe the people, it's not our intention isn't the bottom line. It's the way that we come across, you know, to other people, to people of color. If we say something offensive to them, it's offensive. And we need to listen and see what we need to change in order to not do it again.